Oh gosh, look at the crowd.
Come this way.
Those who spread goodness radiate happiness to everyone around them. Introducing LOLC Finance Credit Cards. Fuel the goodness in you.
Display your brand message on digital screens at prime locations. The largest digital advertising network in Sri Lanka. Emerging Media.
This is LMDtv, and I'm Fazmina Imamudeen. Joining us tonight is Naushalya Rajapaksha. Hello, Naushalya. I warmly welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Fazmina, for the invitation.
We would like to begin with a big picture take, please. The 2023 budget announcement is eagerly anticipated. What do you think the country needs most at this time, which should be included in the budget?
Fazmina, thank you so much for that first question. It's actually a very pertinent question to be asked at a time like this. And according to the president, of course, the interim budget was prepared in order to sort of lay a basic foundation for the changing economic sort of climate in the country. And I feel that in order to formulate like a new economic policy and to adopt a new world order, this interim budget was very important to be looked at. And according to this speech, of course, I saw, especially in terms of youth empowerment, we saw that how the government had decided to sort of put forth so many proposals for youth empowerment, especially in terms of giving incentives for youth agricultural companies to be established and to be linked with 331 divisional federation of youth clubs. We saw how the government had also suggested that 20 acres of land to be allotted to currently unemployed youth groups to getting to sort of use those plots of land for agricultural purposes, and about 50 million rupees were allocated for such purposes. And we also saw how in order to sort of upskill the youth in Sri Lanka for especially in terms of training and qualification in the Sri Lankan labor markets, about 200 million rupees were allocated for young people to be trained and for qualifications to be given to them under NVQ and other vocational training institutions. But Fazmina, the question remains as to why there was not much of mention about women and about the sort of budgetary allocations for women, other than, of course, we saw how under social welfare, a monthly allowance of 2,500 rupees were allocated for pregnant women in addition to the 20,000 rupees allocation. So I feel that in terms of women, there should have been more allocation, especially in terms of upliftment of women, empowerment of women, especially in the areas of water, sanitation, and the sanitary facilities. But of course, I understand that, you know, we are speaking about this from a country where we don't have a cabinet ministry allocated for women, and not just for women, and women comprises of 52% of our population. And we don't have a cabinet ministry to represent the majority population in the country. So in that context, I understand why maybe some of the issues of women could have been overlooked, but it is not a good enough reason, because Sri Lanka has undertaken plenty of international obligations. And amidst those international obligations, I think it would have been vital for Sri Lanka to also look at ways in which women could be uplifted and empowered, especially through some sense of investment and budgetary allocation towards resolving the water, sanitation, and access to sanitary facilities in Sri Lanka, because that is one of the biggest issues in my point of view that is encountered by a majority of the adolescent girls and women in this country.
What are your expectations of the 2023 budget, and how have proposals set out in the interim budget affected the appetite for litigation in areas such as public interest?
Fazmina, when you look at some of the proposals, I think one proposal that really took everybody's attention was the proposed tax hikes. And because it was, these proposed tax hikes was actually seen as a disincentive, because people felt that the President Wickremesinghe was bringing the 2019 tax rates, especially subsequent to such an economic crisis, and especially when the inflation of the country is running at 70%. And so therefore, maybe we could have instead would have had like a flat personal tax rate, or would have been more equitable and feasible in this context, rather than to discourage any growth in income, especially in any growth in personal income, disposable income, sorry. So people felt that it was more of like a knee-jerk measure to, to sort of have these tax hikes in order to boost government revenue. Because right now, what we need to understand is people have because the cost in fuel, the cost in terms of cooking gas, electricity, water, all of these cost factors have gone up. And so with the 50% of the depreciation of the rupee, and so people like you and I, we have adjusted, being young professionals, we have adjusted our consumption to sort of suit the shrunk disposable income. And so on top of that, when we have to face like these tax penalties, I believe that young professionals are now looking to sort of migrate and sort of cause the professional brain drain in the country, because they feel that this proposed tax hikes is like a final nail in the coffin, so to say, in their careers. So therefore, I feel that instead of these tax hikes, if the government can also seek ways in which they could recover the proceeds of political corruption in the country. And because I feel that they should have also looked into how best we could strengthen the existing laws and the existing legislative framework to sort of strengthen asset recovery laws in the country, because I feel that it's an important element in the pursuit of anti-corruption in Sri Lanka. Because right now, if you look at some of the laws in the country in terms of asset recovery, we do not have any holistic law to say on asset recovery, right? And therefore, now we know that sometime back, we also established a task force called the Stolen Assets Recovery Task Force, which was a presidential task force which was established to work on a draft piece of law to govern the proceeds of crime. But then we really don't know where this committee is in terms of drafting this bill. So I feel that, if we can sort of strengthen the existing laws, especially the laws that we have, also sometimes unless and otherwise, because one of the biggest issues that we have is Sri Lanka doesn't have like a non-conviction based forfeiture mechanism of assets and other proceeds according to the existing laws in the country. So I feel that in terms of the proposed budget, if we can also, instead of always trying to sort of taking back, especially from young professionals who did not leave the country amidst an economic crisis, amidst whatever happened, I feel that if they can be not just, if they can be sort of empowered to stay in the country and sort of reduce these proposed tax hikes, and also to sort of seek out ways in which, alternative ways in which to recover the proceeds of political corruption, I feel that that would be a fantastic way for the government to boost their revenues instead of putting that burden on people. I feel that on that notion itself, there should be ideally more public interest litigation cases going before the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka.
You started out some years ago as a social change entrepreneur. And you have said that it is indeed really tough to spot a mortal young being who does not claim to play a lead role in this big drive of youth towards social change, constructing the future they want. What was the social change that you were asking for then? And how much of it has become reality today?
So Fazmina, I was a social change entrepreneur when I was working at the United Nations Populations Fund in Sri Lanka in 2015 when I was about 21 years old. And during this time, actually, Fazmina, my biggest, I was supposed to come up with a project in which I was supposed to venture into the uncharted territories and seek out how best I could sort of give a solution to an existing gap of a policy or a law in this country. And I felt that this issue of sexual harassment in public transport, one of the prevalent causes of and forms of sexual harassment that mostly women and also men endure when you travel in public transport. So I felt that something needed to be done about this. But one of the biggest obstacles I faced was the fact that we did not have national level research on sexual harassment in public transport. So then I was able to spearhead the first ever national research on sexual harassment in public transport as an employee of the United Nations Populations Fund, and I got a fantastic backing support from the United Nations Populations Fund at the time, and because they were always thinking outside the box and they loved and cherished new ideas. So thanks to them, actually, I was able to, even as a 21-year-old, I was able to spearhead an entire the first national research on sexual harassment in public transport. And with the findings, actually, what I wanted to do was to sort of, through a policy advocacy process, to recognize the offense of sexual harassment in public transport under the existing penal provisions on sexual harassment. Because the existing legal provision on sexual harassment doesn't explicitly speak of sexual harassment in public transport. And therefore, I wanted to, through this research, show how this is a kind of offense that need like a special sort of like a clear sort of a recognition in the penal code itself, because people undergo sexual harassment in public transport almost every day, right? But of course, when I look back from then to now, I have seen how hotlines have been developed, but of course the law has not yet been amended thus far. But of course, I have seen how hotlines have been developed, and there are also fantastic projects done by other civil society organizations and other INGOs on sort of raising awareness about sexual harassment in public transport, and also to sort of raise confidence in people to sort of speak out, and also to sort of distribute that sense of accountability and responsibility amongst the co-passengers to ensure that such kind of an offense wouldn't take place. But of course, it's not without issues actually. Now, especially if you take this hotline for an example, I have encountered situations where when you call this hotline, sometimes the first question they ask is, can you identify the perpetrator? Or can you identify the vehicle number? Now, of course, if anybody has gone or if anybody has used public transport, you would know that after you get into a bus, you really wouldn't know the vehicle number of the bus. So to inform that to the person to whom you are now making the call to, it would be very difficult. It would be rather practically impossible. So it's not without practical issues, but I feel that we have come a long way, and now people are aware of the law. People are also aware of what they themselves would face if they sort of violate the law. So I think we have come a long way, and it needs to be really appreciated.
Over a year ago, with the aim of improving female participation in governance, you launched an open dialogue to identify the barriers women face when entering parliament and engaging in parliamentary politics. Post the events of this year, where do think we stand with attracting more female participation in politics?
Thank you, Fazmina, for that question. Actually, this project was done by the Yeheliya Foundation, and I have to mention the fantastic team at the Yeheliya Foundation also, who helped make this project a reality. It was with their support that Yeheliya was able to actually realize this project that we were doing under the title of Diyavanna Tharanaya, or Crossing Diyavannava. And under this project, actually, our target was to identify the barriers that women face in entering the parliament, so to say. So not only we identified the barriers that women face, we also identified solutions. So when you look at some of the barriers, I feel that these barriers are still in existence, right? Especially in terms of the transparency of handing over nomination papers. Now, because now during this project, what we did was we actually spoke to community level leaders. We spoke to leaders from certain youth organizations. We also spoke to members of parliament. We also spoke to active political activists. We also spoke to members of the local government, of the provincial council. So most of these people, what they were able to commonly highlight was the fact that there's so much non-transparency that exists in the political parties itself, especially when it comes to handing over, for an example, nomination papers. So a person who goes through an interview process and a person who has expressed their interest to sort of run or contest during a certain election, that particular person would not know why he or she did not get that particular nomination from this political party. That person to date does not know how marks were allocated, because that process is not transparent. It's not public. So for an example, I wouldn't know, with the set of qualifications and with the sort of educational qualifications and experience I have as a professional, let's say if I go to one of these political meetings and if I raise my hand and say, yes, I would like to contest, and if I face one of these interviews, I wouldn't know how I myself would be marked, because this process of marking and allocating marks to a candidate, it's not transparent. So this was one of the biggest issues that we highlighted, and none of the parties thus far have never pledged to sort of have their recruitment schemes open or be transparent about it, unfortunately. So I feel that this is an area that we have to really look into and work on.
How can we as a society at large encourage women to come forward, especially professional qualified women, to participate in governance? Though we proudly proclaim the first female prime minister, does society really view a female candidate as just another candidate and treat her with the same respect and support given to a male candidate?
Sorry about that. Fazmina, excuse me for a minute. Sorry about that. I got a bit of a cough. Yes, Fazmina, actually, that's a very, once again, a very pertinent question, because we know how in 1960, Sri Lanka gave birth to the first female head of state in the world, for an example. But now, if you look at some of the statistics, out of the 225 members in the parliament, we have less than 12 female members in the parliament, right? And the other question is, why do people go to the parliament? They go to the parliament to make policies and laws. Now, and we also need to understand that in Sri Lanka, out of the 22 million, the majority population comprises of women. So we live in a country with 52% of women, right? So in a country with a majority population of women, unfortunately, that does not get reflected in the parliament. Why? Because of some of the barriers that we have spoken of, especially due to the non-transparency of the political parties themselves, right? And secondly, because of the fact that the election finances, we don't have any specific legislation to sort of monitor the election finances. For an example, we don't have sort of a we haven't really imposed a certain financial cap on what is being spent on campaign. So person who is able to sort of spend for a campaign, because we know that especially in Sri Lanka, we have an appetite. Our appetite is more towards welfare politics. We still have voters who would cast their vote for that politician who would give them a bag of goods, as opposed to a politician who would speak of changing policies, who would speak with such substance, a politician who is educated, who also knows what he or she is talking about, right? So in that context, when you take intersectionality into account, especially in that context, you would understand that due to the lack of financial regulations in terms of campaign, especially in terms of campaign financing, especially due to the non-transparency in the political parties, and also due to the lack of media regulations as to what is being posted, especially on social media. It is very, very difficult for a female candidate to really overcome this hurdle, because media itself now, especially, I think I must mention this also. Today in the morning, I witnessed a certain video that was being circulated of a young female politician who was going to speak about the tax proposals. But of course, she's now that particular video has been circulated on social media, and over 400,000 people have viewed this, and people are sending comments, and people are sharing this video solely because of the fact that she took a split second to sort of collect her thoughts before she spoke, and she spoke with such substance. She spoke such substance about the existing the sort of, she spoke about the tax proposals and the impact it would have to the young professionals. So for a topic like that, even when women come out and speak about such topics, sometimes so much of mud is being thrown at them for such petty issues. So especially we really need some solid media guidelines, especially in our online platforms such as social media, because if you look at our legislative framework on hate speech, you will see even under the Constitution, even under the Police Ordinance, even under the Constitution, even under the Prevention of the Terrorism Act, even under the Computer Crimes Act, all of these laws only speaks of how best hate speech can be mitigated and curtailed in terms of religious disharmony, right? But nothing on how we could sort of tackle this issue of gender discrimination, and this issue of hate speech in terms of gender discrimination, especially in social media and other mainstream media. And to date, we see how in mainstream media, women are being objectified. Women are being objectified, and to date, it is a woman in Sri Lanka who makes that cup of tea. It's to date, according to these advertisements, that it is a woman who is responsible for ensuring that the house is clean and is without germs, and it's a woman who has to take care of the children, from like washing the baby to changing diapers to everything. It's still to date such stereotypes are still embedded, and it is being enabled and it is being shared amongst the public today through media. So what is the role of media also in eradicating and in sort of taking down these barriers that women face when entering politics? I think that is also very important for us to speak of, because we have seen how sometimes even when female politicians are invited on board to speak about some of the national issues, they are always limited to speak about only issues pertaining to women. But women are sometimes not invited to speak about the existing proposals on the new budget, the sort of tax proposals, on the sort of impact the tax proposals would have on women and children. We don't have, I mean, most of these women aren't invited on board to sort of speak about these topics. And sometimes women are sort of limited to speaking about only issues of women, so to say. But when it comes to other national issues, sometimes we see a lack of participation of women due to some of this mainstream media not inviting some of these women to come on board. So I feel that especially because of these three issues, it's very difficult to sort of sustain good female candidates to come forward and also help take good policy decisions, because at the end of the day, a politician should be somebody who's able to take good policy decisions. So we don't necessarily just need great speakers. We need good people with substance to come forward, collect their thoughts and speak with substance. So unfortunately, even when a person comes forward to speak about these issues, that person is just struck down on very trivial, on very petty matters. So I think that really needs to be looked into and negated.
What changes should we make as a society, especially from the perspective of the youth, to create an atmosphere in which there will be equal participation by both genders in politics, as we see in professions?
I think, we really have to change the perspective of young people. I think that is certainly the beginning. And I feel that in changing the perspective of young people, we have to also try and see how best we can sort of inculcate some of these novel thinking into the existing educational system in the country. Because at the end of the day, Fazmina, we see when you look at the statistics, when you take the statistics of this country, you will understand that more than 90% of equal number of girls and boys get enrolled to schools in this country. If you take our literacy rate, once again, we have over 90% of a literacy rate in this country, right? So, but what happens is, and also if you go to a convocation ceremony, a graduation ceremony, and sit down and start counting the amount of female graduates, of course, we have more female graduates than male graduates in this country. But unfortunately, that doesn't get reflected when you look at the employment sector, when you look at the statistics in the employment sector. Because in the employment sector, once again, we have 70% of men and only 30% of women, right? So then the question is, why is this? Why is that, these educated women, why are they being sort of transformed or translated into the employment sector of this country? What do they lack? What is it that they lack? Because it's certainly not education, that it doesn't certainly mean they're not qualified. So, but certainly what happens is in this transition, I feel that it is the existing cultural barriers, religious barriers, the existing social norms that sort of pull back a woman as opposed to a man, right? And that is, once again, it's because of the existing perceptions in the country. Existing perceptions in the country, underdeveloped perceptions in the country, that who still thinks that having a woman. Now, for an example, Fazmina, we have seen how even when a woman goes to an interview, sometimes the first question the interviewer would ask is, are you married or do you intend to be married? And if you're married, the other question is, do you intend to have a child anytime recently? Questions sometimes developed countries don't even ask because these are such personal matters. But sometimes these are the kind of questions that even people ask, right? Because a woman is always sometimes mostly seen as a liability as opposed to an asset. Because an unmarried woman, especially because given her her civil status, and if she's not married, because the employer would then immediately might think that, okay, so now she will get married, now she would be pregnant, we'll have to pay her maternity, and she would be gone on maternity, then what do we do during this period? So because of these particular issues, I feel that once again, because of these existing misconceptions and age-old perceptions in the society, once again, a woman is being held back. So I feel that to change these perceptions, education sector is going to really help us a lot. And especially, I must mention this also: if our education sector, especially our education system, can really inculcate lessons on gender, on sexual and reproductive health, even some of the issues that I spoke earlier in terms of sanitation, in terms of sanitary facilities and products, even topics like that will no longer be a topic of it will not longer be a very sort of like a taboo topic that people really don't talk of. It could be a very, we can all then sort of engage in an open conversation about these topics and see how best we can drive this country to success. So I feel that in changing the perceptions, especially the perceptions of youth, education sector plays a huge role, and it's very important that we try and see how best we can influence education sector to include these topics as well.
You may be aware that LMD has launched a campaign titled Refresh Sri Lanka to encourage greater awareness and engagement with a mindset change, as we desperately need a more civic-minded society. What advice would you give on positioning such a campaign and obtaining engagement among women and youth?
I feel that Fazmina, this is a brilliant campaign that LMD is doing with the title Refresh Sri Lanka. I have read about the project also, and I feel that if you are to sort of encourage young people, and if you want to sort of spread greater awareness about the project, I think utilizing the existing social media spaces would be ideal. Because you can see how even to, I mean, there are so many young people out there who would view an online, people playing an online game like PUBG, for an example. There would be thousands of young people just watching somebody play PUBG on social media. So that was a very good, like a very interesting indicator for us also to understand that, okay, so young people do have, not just do they have access to mobile connections, but they also have access to internet connections to actually watch all of these. So if the existing social media platforms can be utilized, I feel that whatever the ideas or whatever the change that refresh Sri Lanka intends to do, I feel that utilizing the social media landscape and also taking into account the language inequality in the country, if you can also address the language inequality in the country in your campaign and ensure that there is no space for language inequality in any of the campaign materials, so to say, meaning that if all the content can be sort of translated into all the languages, I feel that there would be much more inclusive participation and there would be so many people taking part, since language will not be a barrier.
What type of messaging on civic mindedness would best appeal to the younger generation now, as communication methods are so fragmented with the diversity of channels of information? In your opinion, what would be the most effective channels through which to reach women and youth and encourage a mindset reboot and attract their active participation in change?
Once again, I feel that it is social media. I feel that that is the most effective channel through which young people can be reached. But of course, we have seen a sense of when it comes to digital literacy, of course, we see that the digital literacy of women are much more lesser than the digital literacy of men, right? But of course, if we can sort of see a way in which where we could gap this digital literacy also, I think then even women could be reached through these platforms. And especially, like I said earlier, if you can also take into account whatever is sort of communicated to them, if you can ensure that these are that these are gender sensitive, and it's also, it has no space for language inequality, and that if you can also bring out a narrative, like a good narrative, like the sort of like a change narrative into account, for an example, in terms of if you speak of gender sensitivity, and also if you can also bring narratives, like change narratives on what gender is, the difference between simple things like difference between sex and gender, for an example, difference between different sexual orientations, like topics of this nature also needs to be really spoken of, so that people understand, okay, so this is how, okay, this is, different people of genders can exist in my society, and all of us are human. I need to be able to respect another person. I mean, even though that person doesn't belong to my gender, but I need to be able to respect another person because that person is also human. So likewise, if we can bring these new narratives which are not really taught to especially the young people in this country, because we know that the health chapter is usually skipped in the classroom because the teacher is not interested to do the health chapter. We know that we don't have proper education on sexual and reproductive health. So if we can, through Refresh Sri Lanka, even speak about these topics and have like very, interesting, interactive conversations about some of the topics that are not being discussed, taking into account, of course, the fact that it has to sort of be communicated in all languages. Also taking into account, if you can also inculcate sign language to sort of when you do promote your messages, I think that would be fantastic. So I feel that through Refresh Sri Lanka, you can do so much, and also you can utilize the existing social media spaces. And by utilizing the existing social media spaces, I really hope that you will also speak of these topics that are not really spoken of, and sort of distill the existing misconceptions in the society in terms of gender, in terms of a lot of other topics, and a lot of stereotyping of women. And so by talking about these things and by distilling misconceptions, I feel that the barriers, the sort of barriers that women encounter even when trying to be a policymaker, I think these sort of conversations would benefit in sort of removing these barriers also.
Any closing thoughts you would like to share with our audience?
So I would like to go back to speaking about barriers that women face when entering and sustaining in politics. I feel that all of us have a duty to ensure that more women actually come into politics at the local level, at the local government level, at the provincial level, at the also into the parliament also, because at the end of the day, 52% of this population is women. But that is not being reflected when it comes to the policies that are being made. And especially that was very apparent, especially in a country with that 52% of population, when we don't have an assigned cabinet ministry to look into the subject of women's affairs and children, which is the majority of the country and which is also the future of this country. And therefore, that is why we have seen over and over again topics like simple topics, cross-cutting topics like water, sanitation, and sanitary facilities. They're always been overlooked because we don't have enough voices in the parliament, in the provincial council, in the local government to really push for these topics that are also very relevant and unique to womankind. So as much as we take care of our pregnant mothers, we need to understand that social welfare for women is not limited to pregnant mothers. We also have so many other unaddressed issues of women, so which needs to be addressed. And for that, we really need to push for more and more women, active women participation, active women leadership. And a woman, especially when a woman strives to get there and also tries to sort of break away these barriers and get to a place where she will represent us, where she will speak about us, I think we should give that woman our fullest support instead of unnecessarily, we ourselves, we need to ensure that we would not unnecessarily sort of throw mud at such political representatives, but political or community representatives, but we must encourage even amongst ourselves for women to really come forward, to sort of voice their opinions, voice their concerns, know their rights, and also try and have more and more women leaders in a society where no longer do we no longer we even have to use the word women leaders, but leaders. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Naushalya. In light of the current climate in the country and the path forward, I appreciate you sharing your views on the position of women and youth and the significance of their contribution.
Thank you so much, Fazmina, for having me tonight. Thank you so much.
That's all from us tonight. Good night.
Good night.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching and stay safe.